Why would anyone want to visit Trujillo, the third largest city in Peru, situated on its barren desert coast and characterized by its massive great landscape? What could this isolated city possibly have to offer? No one really talks about what lays beyond the city, a rich tapestry of ancient civilizations, nearly on par with those of ancient Egypt. These civilizations expanded, thrived, and constructed massive cities, pyramids, and temples before ultimately collapsing into the surrounding deserts near Trujillo. And what was the link between Trujillo and the final collapse of the most powerful Inca Empire? And why do the locals feature giant phallic statues as one of their primary places for celebration? Trujillo isn't a place most tourists, foreigners, backpackers, or even locals mention in their travel adventures. But for some reason, I had to investigate this mysteriously unspoken about city, which, outside of its mundane landscape, uncovers a truly deep and ancient history of Peru. Immediately arriving in the airport, checking into my hotel, and setting foot into the city, I had to begin the adventure. As I powered through the streets, I briefly crossed the beautifully colored red and white temple and monastery of Santa Clara, founded in 1587. Then, an odd curiosity in Latin America were stores all selling the same thing in a tight concentration, like seeing 5 Starbucks cafes all lined up next to each other. If you try to find Trujillo on Google Maps, you might not immediately be directed to Peru. Instead, you might fly to the town of Trujillo in the western Spanish region of Extremadura. Born in Trujillo, Spain, was Francisco Pizarro, the conquistador, who killed the last free Inca emperor, leading to the complete destruction of the Inca Empire. Over the decades, most statues commemorating the conquest figures, such as those for Francisco Pizarro, were removed due to the historically inhumane oppression and destruction caused by colonialism. Yet the name for Trujillo remains in place until this day. After a quick stroll through the plaza, it was time to head to the ancient city of Chanchan, just minutes away outside of Trujillo. Chanchan was the capital of the Chimu Empire, which existed from around 900 CE until it was conquered by the Inca Empire around 1470 CE. This was one of the biggest ancient cities in the Americas and the largest city in the world made of Adobe, which is a kind of building material made from sun-dried earth. The city covers about 20 square kilometers. The city was divided into big sections called citadels. Each citadel was like a mini-city with its own high, thick walls. Inside these walls were different kinds of buildings, like temples, burial chambers for the dead, and water storage areas. The outer parts of the citadels had homes where people lived. The walls and buildings in Chanchan were decorated with detailed carvings showing things like animals, people, and shapes. The final conquest of the enormously large and powerful city of Chanchan was done through the use of military force, strategic alliances, and cunning. The Incas most likely diverted the water supply to put additional pressure on the city, exploiting the region's arid, desert-like climate. Once the city was captured, the culture and technologies were absorbed, and the inhabitants were forcefully resettled throughout the Inca Empire to prevent any resistance. Nowadays, Chanchan is at risk not from conquest but from the weather, especially heavy rains from events like El Niño, which damaged the buildings made of adobe.
So despite looking like a empty plaza with no rooftop, this was actually a pathway for the locals or the servants to pass through, and there was actually a ceiling as well. So currently there's no ceiling because it was ultimately decayed and destroyed, but they would use a material similar to bamboo but much thinner and from the local environment, and that bamboo, that very thin style of bamboo, would cover this entire location. Entonces este fue unos pozos de agua para la cultivación, agricultura, y pues llenan todo con agua dulce, entonces agua que podría tomar, y en todos lados es el muro de la ciudadela de la ciudad de los Chimu.
After learning about the tragic history of Chanchan, we made our way to the tiny fishing village of Huanchaco. One of Huanchaco's most distinctive features is its caballitos de totora, traditional fishing boats made from reeds, which have been used by local fishermen for thousands of years. These boats, whose name translates to little reed horses, are ridden straddled and are thought to be among the earliest known forms of surfboards. You could tell the town's relaxed vibe makes Huanchaco a popular spot for people from Trujillo who want to unwind from the dense city life.
So I'm going to say that this tour was ultimately kind of strange because we went to a museum and then we went to the ruins, and then they essentially dropped us off in a small village beside the beach. The village itself is really nice. It's called Huanchaco.
Later that night, I strolled around Trujillo, which was just days away from celebrating Christmas. It paradoxes me to believe that just a few hundred years before, this entire area would have been shocked at the absolutely alien culture that was taking place in their land. A culture celebrating the birth of a Middle Eastern individual who appears to be white in his statues, forcefully introduced from a land called Spain halfway across the world, now using a giant Germanic pagan tree to celebrate the event of giving, but mostly to sell as many discounts and promotions as possible to helpless people who feel guilt-tripped into buying things for their friends, family, and loved ones. Local performers danced their colonial Spanish dances in attire worn in Spain many centuries ago. Onlookers cheered them on, completely oblivious that their original culture had been entirely erased from even the slightest belief. Despite these massive mental gymnastics, I couldn't help but take a selfie with the Christmas-styled llama. Then it was time to enjoy one of my most favorite drinks in all of Peru, a hot cup of emoliente. This is a boiled mix of various leaves, spices, and fruits, touted as having various health benefits depending on what you mix in, 1,000 times better than your typical coffee, and 3 times less expensive. And then it was time for bed. So it's 9:30 a.m. right now, and I signed up for a lot of tours today in Trujillo. So right now I'm going to go to a museum, and then more museums, then more museums. So it's a day full of history, archaeology, discovery, and learning. The museum featured beautifully crafted statuettes depicting the gradual evolution of human civilization within the Trujillo region. Visitors can explore the history of the Moche civilization, which thrived from 100 to 800 Common Era, followed by the Chimu civilization, known for building Chanchan, which flourished from 900 Common Era until their fall to the Inca Empire in 1470. Exhibits cover a range of topics, including dance, religion, combat, and more. My favorite part was the giant map showing the rivers flowing from the Andes Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. Each river once supported its own distinct civilization and culture until their eventual collapse into the books of history, or as cities that gradually redeveloped like Trujillo and Lima, the capital of Peru.
Let's go to the market. Vamos al mercado.
After an educational experience, the brain was famished, so it was time to hunt for something delicious in the local Trujillo market. I would ultimately settle on beans, rice, chopped onions, and pasta. We head out towards the southern frontiers of Trujillo, towards the gateway to one of the oldest advanced civilizations in Peru. From 100 Common Era to 800 Common Era, this region was the cultural heart of the Moche Empire and the Mochica peoples. They settled in the Moche and Chicama river valleys, where they built complex irrigation systems to support their agriculture. The Moche did not have a centralized political structure. Instead, their civilization was made up of a series of independent city-states, each ruled by a priest-king. They were skilled metalworkers producing detailed jewelry, tools, ceremonial objects, and weapons from gold, silver, and copper. In their intricate pottery, the Moche frequently depicted warriors and scenes of combat, indicating that warfare held a significant role in their society. Our next stop was into one of the homes deep in the deserts of the Moche district. We were given a few moments to check out the various souvenirs of the Moche Huacos, or Moche portrait vessels. Of particular interest were the little Huaco statues and keyrings representing good fertility. Then it was time for the sacrificial ceremony. Historically, this ceremony was the aftermath of ritual combat, with the loser becoming the sacrifice. After being publicly humiliated, the captive is sacrificed, often through bloodletting. The collected blood is drunk by high-ranking individuals, including the priest-king of the region. This ceremony is depicted frequently among Moche art on pottery and walls. As you continue on your tour, you can't help but notice a sacred Hill of the Moon mountain sitting isolated in the landscape. Upon arriving closer, this hill guards one of the oldest pieces of human history, the Temple of the Sun and the Moon. The Huaca del Sol, composed mainly of adobe bricks, was the largest pre-Columbian structure in Peru. It was likely used for administrative, military, and residential functions, given the large quantity of artifacts related to these activities discovered at the site. However, much of the original structure was destroyed, first by the Spanish conquistadors looking for gold, and later by natural erosion, especially from El Niño-related flooding. In contrast, the nearby Huaca de la Luna served primarily as a religious and ceremonial center. It consists of multiple platforms, each one built over the previous one over time, creating a layered history of the Moche people. The walls of the temple are decorated with stunning carvings depicting the various Moche gods and rituals, with many of the original pigments surprisingly well preserved. Excavating at the Huaca de la Luna have also revealed a large plaza for public gatherings and a complex of tombs, including some containing high-ranking individuals. The relationship between the two Huacas suggests a complex interaction between religious, ceremonial, and administrative military aspects of Moche society. The Huacas de Moche site, as it is collectively known, continues to be an important focus of archaeological research and has provided invaluable insights into the Moche civilization. So this is the city of Huacas de Moche, and this population or city actually existed several hundred years before the Chanchan population that was populating the coast. What happened was there was a big climactic change that happened gradually over time, and eventually this area wasn't very fertile anymore, as well as elites were no longer able to control the population. They would continue sacrificing people, as well as their firstborn sons, and the population couldn't reproduce anymore. They died out because they were not able to produce any more agriculture because of the climate once again. Now, the city itself got water from the local river. The river isn't very good anymore. The water's contaminated nowadays, but back in the day, that's what they would get the water from. And also this city has its sacrifices. They sacrifice people. They have their own gods as well. It's a wonderful exhibition. I highly recommend you end up coming to the city of Oaxacas de Moche. Once you finish up with the history, it's time to celebrate with the giant penis and vagina Huaco statues of the ancient Moche civilization. Some statues depict consensual sex or statues of fertility and reproduction, while others show more aggressive human nature. Researchers argue that these statues served an educational role, teaching about human reproduction, while others propose they were linked to fertility rituals dedicated to the reproduction and agricultural abundance, given the common association between human sexuality and fertility in many cultures. Nowadays, Peru is a devoutly Christian society, so in 2022, masked men came at night and vandalized the statues. While a small portion of Christian society are deeply offended by these ancient statues, most locals and tourists love taking a photo with them. Gracias. ¿Cómo se llama? Chicha de jora. So this is a chicha de jora. It tastes a little bit like honey, and it's very, very sweet. Because it's fermented, it tastes a little bit like alcohol, but very, very light. Less than 1%. So, salud. While exploring the city at night, I encountered protests against the recent imprisonment of Peru's president. This was a fleeting glimpse into a moment of Peru's long and complex history. Despite Trujillo feeling like a mundane city in the northern regions of Peru, it hides some of the deepest and richest snapshots of human history. From the sand-swept temples of the sun and the moon of the Moche civilization, etched into the massive protruding hills in the deserts, to the eroding towering walls of the city of Chanchan that once thrived and then was conquered of the Chimu peoples, to the ancient fishing beaches of Huanchaco that is rapidly being gentrified into a resort town, and finally to the bustling metropolis of Trujillo. which evolved through tragic circumstances of conquest, colonialism, and ultimately the complete erase of any semblance of the cultures that once roamed here. Afterward, it was time to transition from the lesser-known destination of Trujillo to arguably the most well-known and frequently visited historical sites in Peru, the colonial city of Cusco and the ruins of Machu Picchu, deep in the Andes Mountains. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next adventure. Leonidas here, cheers, salud, and za zdarowie.